I'm Bonner McAllister. This is the welcome moment. And, okay, I wrote it down here. I am the luckiest person I know to have been partners with Joe Baker for more than 50 years, and nearly all the time right here in Monterey. We have something marvelous here, as we can see just by looking around us. Joe was a lucky guy, so thank you all for both of us. We got family, we got neighbors, we got people I know, but oh yeah, there's Richie. I'm going to introduce the speakers. If you look on your program, you'll see a page that looks like that. And it starts off with Peter Marquette, who needs no introduction probably. Am I okay to the mic?
Yes.
Yeah. And you read it down, and you go up to the top, and you read down again. But first I'll say that we're going to sing a song. Me and my friend Marianne, who's sitting right here, old classmate of mine. I mean, an old friend who is a classmate of mine from Antioch. And first I'm gonna play the tune on my harmonica, and then you can sing with us because you'll know it because you'll have heard the tune, and all you got to do is look at the very back page and there's all the words. But if you don't have to sing it if you don't want to. And yeah, here's my notes about our arrangement. That is the hard part. Or you can just listen and mumble along. It's all music and it's welcome here. And then when I'm standing by the mic, I will read you the dedication to Joe Baker in a Western novel called Stolen. That's the title of the novel. And it was written by a friend of ours who knew Joe before I ever did. And that is when Joe was a New Jersey cowboy, actually, out west. And I'm going to read what Tom wrote in his introduction, Tom Barrett, in his introduction, or his dedication of his book to Joe. And when does that come? Oh well, maybe I'll read it right now. That would take care of that. Okay, here it is. Nice western mountains. This guy lives in Bozeman, Montana, and he dedicated this book to Joe. Joe and I first met in 1968 at the White Grass Ranch in Jackson, Wyoming, where we wrangled horses and took pack trips into the Teton and Gros Morte Ranges and Yellowstone National Park. We wrangled horses from near the mouth of Death Canyon, along the shores of Phelps Lake, and at the base of Buck Mountain. We rode through the timber looking for horses in snow, rain, or shine. It's amazing how you forget the bad weather days. One summer at the end of the season, we had the chance to ride some wild horses from the Red Desert at the Jackson Rodeo because we were young. And you know the rest of that, how the rest of that goes. Yes, I do know the story of that. I'll interrupt the dedication to tell you that Joe at that time had a great big mustache. And he went up to the chute where horse number 7 was assigned to him, and he was supposed to get on it and ride it. And just as he did, a somewhat inebriated cowboy approached him and said, "Hey, guru, that's my horse." So I guess that was the mustache talking. So Joe had to let that guy take this horse. And he rode him out, and the drunken cowboy rode him out and immediately got bucked off. And Joe took the next horse, which was in a way even more embarrassing because that horse never bucked at all. It just ran round and round and round and round the arena until somebody rang the buzzer and it was over. Then years later, we worked together in the hunting camp at the Darwin Ranch in the Gros Morte Mountains. The Darwin sits in a beautiful meadow at 8,000 feet. After that, Joe and his wife Bonner headed for Cody, Wyoming, where Joe managed part of the Valley Ranch up the South Fork of the Shoshone River. Joe entertained the various crowds with his guitar and fiddle and singing. Joe can rope and ride, you bet. Now, that's a quote from a cowboy song called Windy Bill was a Texas man and he could rope, you bet. All right, that's enough from Tom Barrett. Now I'm going to continue reading my speech. Well, I'll just say that you may not have thought of Joe as a cowboy, but when we first met at the Darwin Ranch, I think he thought of himself as a cowboy. In fact, he even spoke with a Western drawl, like you do when you're a cowboy, right? Okay, the next thing that's happening is Mary Ann and I are going to sing a song. And it's written by Kate Wolf, and the words are on the back, and if you want to catch on and join in, you're welcome. I've been walking in my sleep, counting troubles, set a counting sheep. Where the years went, I can't say. I just turned around, they've gone away. I've been sifting through the layers of dusty wood and faded papers to tell a story I used to know when I was so long ago. It's gone away with yesterday, and I find myself on the mountainside where the rivers change direction across the great divide. I've been sifting. Now I heard the owl calling softly as the night was falling. With a question I replied, now he's gone across the line. He's gone away yesterday. Now I find myself on the mountainside where the rivers change direction across the great divide. The finest hour that I have seen is the one that comes between the edge of night and the break of day, when the darkness rolls away. It's gone away like yesterday, and I find myself on the mountainside where the rivers change direction across the great divide. It's gone away with yesterday, and I find myself on the mountainside where the rivers change direction across the great divide. What's next?
On her microphone.
What's next? Okay, 10 good friends and family with their speechifying. Introduce Peter Marquette.
Thank you, Bonner. Thank you, everybody, for your sunny faces on a sunny day that didn't quite start out that way. In the 1970s, there appeared in Monterey 3 young couples determined to make a home here on their own homesteader terms, which had varied components like outhouses, composting toilet, veggie garden, chickens and goats and pigs. Each couple had 3 parts, 2 persons, and the couple greater than its parts. That's when I first met Joe Baker, a tall guy with long legs, big feet, broad shoulders, and a baritone voice. The couple, Joe and Bonner, built their log house by hand of red pine logs from a Depression-era plantation in Monterey. It took a few years. In those house-building years, the 3 couples regularly shared a day of work, rotating between sites. Then Joe trained as a musical instrument maker. Joe and Bonner had a contradance band, Mountain Laurel. Joe called the tunes and strummed rhythm guitar. Bonner hammered her dulcimer and clacked her spoons, and Donnie, now gone, played violin. A specialty in Joe's instrument shop was the Hardanger fiddle. You can see one inside. It's a Scandinavian folk dance instrument decorated with mother-of-pearl floral patterns in black ink and a hand-carved figurehead in place of a scroll. On the one hand, Joe wrangled tree trunk walls. On the other, he book-matched quarter-sawn Sitka spruce sounding boards to the 1,000th of an inch. 1 person, 2 hands. Before Monterey, Joe wrangled horses on a dude ranch in the Rockies where he met Bonner. Before that, he earned a BA at Princeton, where he also played hockey. In between, he joined the National Guard, but declined serving in Vietnam, which forced his punitive superiors to agree with Joe that he was not fit to serve. As a matter of principle, nothing physical. This resolution was a high-level Joe and Bonner achievement, as was the fact that they grew their own food year after year on the south-facing slope above their log home. Joe was no Luddite. He learned to code just as personal computers invaded homes. Soon, he was designing software for small businesses. At a keyboard, his wrists barely moved, his properly placed fingers moved a little bit, and his keystrokes were gentle. Joe, the painter, focused on pastels, but wore his digital hat to create Show Submit, a full-service platform for juried art exhibitions. His own art won a Master Circle medallion from the International Association of Pastel Societies. After a while, businessman Joe sold the website. Joe knew the stars by name, as well as the birds, who quarreled with squirrels at the feeder outside the window by the softly worn kitchen table Joe made, butternut top on chestnut base. The cat prowls the tabletop as we visit at the kitchen table. The cat may twitch at the action right outside the window or ignore it. All one family. Another thing about the 3 couples. They all grew their families by foreign adoption. Edith Wilson, bless her large and special heart, set aside funds in her will for the education of these adopted Montereyans. Edith arrived in Monterey around 1940 with her lifelong partner Marjorie McLaughlin, decades before the 2 might have chosen to marry, had that then been a legal option. Edith and Marjorie, yet another couple welcomed in Monterey to make a home on their own terms. Edith left that home to the town for a community center, whatever that might be, or however realized, the hub of year-round activity that is MCC today came about under Joe Baker's 16 years of leadership. His bureaucratic perseverance made Edith's wishes into a Monterey hotspot. Who knows how Joe Baker could do so many fine and varied things, each of them well. He was a remarkably accomplished person of remarkable modesty. Joe and I were not day in, day out intimate friends for our 50-odd years, but when his illness abruptly broke the surface, I visited more often. Everyone knows, everyone dies. The concept is hardly threatening. Dying, however, commands attention. As ghastly treatment met relentless illness, what evolved between us was kitchen table conversation, with Joe and Bonner, and with one or the other. We drew on long personal history to be comfortable talking, and easy with the occasional long pause. Can't remember what we talked about. Everything, and nothing much. In his illness, Joe and I took to sailing in my little melon seed, a traditional sprit-rigged skiff replicated by a boat builder our own age in his shop on Cape Cod Bay. Metaphorically speaking, sailing was our way to hold hands, together in a pretty boat we could both appreciate, under the sun and in the wind, water gurgling off the bow. Days before he died, Joe sent me a short email which he closed with the words, Vita brevis ars longa. I doubt he meant it this way, given his characteristic modesty, but I have come to read the familiar saying from Joe as a note on the art of living, which includes the art of dying. In his finely tuned way, he made an art of everything he did. The art of building with purpose, the art of music, the art of showing the world what you alone see, the art of infusing knowledge with heart, the art of politics practiced for the common good. That is, the art of embracing life and dying with grace. This, from Joe, lives on. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete. I'd like to introduce Joe's brother, John Baker.
Peter, thank you. Wonderful. If you can't hear, just raise your hand and I'll remember to get nearer the microphone. And we'll try to maintain that. Don't be horrified that there's an old guy up there without any notes, because we want to try not to overlap with the wonderful remarks from Peter. We all knew this in some way, this wonderful man, this brilliant, creative, curious soul has touched our lives. And I will tell a few little stories that you may or may not have heard, but I apologize for I'm taking away my overlap with what Peter had to say about his love of this community, etc. So you may imagine that as a young child, that Joe was very curious, was very brilliant, was very interested in science and nature. You can imagine Joe doing chemistry experiments in the kitchen sink. You can imagine him making transistor radios. And you can imagine him walking in the forest. We all played in the woods, everybody from the neighborhood. Some people were climbing trees more than others, climbing trees, building tree forts or whatever. And Joe did climb trees. But while some of these people were climbing trees and just constantly running, Joe was probably looking at the trees, learning from the trees, learning about nature. And Joe loved birds from an early age. And you could call him an ornithologist at age 8 because he had lists he was making every year of the birds that he would see, and his lifelong lists. I hesitate to tell the following little anecdote, but not knowing anybody, I think I will do that. I was trying to decide whether to scratch or not, but most people here know that in the 1950s that refrigerators were not as big as they are now, and the freezer compartment was rather small. What probably nobody here, I'm not sure whether Bonner knows, that in the Baker refrigerator, we remember that there was a sealed bag containing a dead crow. Did you know? And it was there so that it could be taken out at a time when this young Joe Baker would have proper time for dissection and discovery. We remember Joe as a musician, for his musical talents, for his love of music and the wonderful instruments that he made, as Peter alluded, and some of the examples that you can see inside. But you probably don't know what instrument Joe played in the middle school. At the public school, they had a lot of instruments, and people could sign up and play what they wanted. And you probably can't imagine that Joe Baker, this happy, tall, thin, somewhat shy young man, walking proudly into the school with his tuba. After college, Joe went to Wyoming, and I visited him there. It was a wonderful visit. It was wintertime. He was taking care of a big house for some people who weren't there. Joe was living there just with his dog. And Joe told me that a week or so before, somebody had lent him a violin. And Joe said he wanted this violin because he wanted to teach himself how to play. I asked if there was anyone around to give lessons, and he said no. So I asked, well, how's it going? And Joe kind of chuckled and said, well, I figured out how to make some sounds, but it's hardly music. Then he chuckled again, and he said, well, maybe you could talk to Rip and find out about how good or bad it is. Rip was his dog lying on the floor. Wonderful dog. So instead of my getting down on the floor and talking to Rip, what happened next was very demonstrative, because Joe reached in the closet, pulled out the violin case. When he did that, Rip was airborne. And Rip ran to the farthest corner of the house and crawled under a bed. Obviously, Joe Baker persisted and loved his music. Also in Wyoming, we had a wonderful experience with Joe. He asked me if I wanted to go fly in an airplane with him. I knew he had taken some flying lessons. I knew he had gotten a license and taken a few passengers, the first one being our oldest sister. And I was quite anxious because I'd never been in a small plane before. It was kind of exciting thinking about what it might be like, but it also was scary. As we drove to the airport and saw the little plane, I became more scared. You could probably fit 4 of those planes under this tent. The plane was about the size of a third of a Volkswagen Bug, with a floppy wing and loose canvas on the outside. And he told me to get in, and I did, and he got in, and we're sitting side by side, and I had to have my shoulders sideways and my arms over here so he would have room for the controls. Perhaps he saw a bead of sweat on my forehead, and sensing how anxious I was, he took the moment to calmly explain that the weather was good, that he'd done this a number of times before, that the air was cool, but that made for more lift for airplanes. And then he started the motor, we took off and flew around the mountains, and it was a beautiful day. The lesson here is that this wonderful, gentle man sensed my huge anxiety, and he knew how to turn bad into good to make it a wonderful experience for me. Joe met Bonner out in Wyoming, and then they came back here. He became, as Peter said, a wonderful builder of buildings and homes, musical instruments. And he and Bonner built a beautiful life in the homestead that they worked so hard on. A beautiful life for their wonderful daughters, Sudie and Cora. I will omit parts of what I might have said about Joe's impressive lifelong artistic talent and art career, also his computer world, because Peter alluded to those and other people will mention these things. It's important, as we remember this wonderful man who lived by the cup being more than half full. He never complained about things. He had horrible, horrible luck in terms of health issues, but never made the worst of it, always made the best of it. When we remember this brilliant, curious fellow, obviously he touched all of us in different ways. And we must each stop and think and wonder and remember what we learned from Joe Baker, from our experiences with him, from how he conducted his life. And we know how much he loved Monterey and this community and his wonderful, wonderful family. Joe, you're the best. We miss you. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Next we'll call Joe's sister Polly, who is right there. Polly Best.
I too have to apologize if I'm going to be repeating some of the same stories or touch on different parts of Joe's life. I am Polly Baker Best, and Joe Baker was my big brother by about 8 inches and 2 years and 1 day older. He and I were the bottom two of the family ladder of 4 children, my being the youngest. And I know for a fact, I don't know if my brother John will agree, that he was our mother's favorite. Hands down. Darn it. I tried so hard my whole life. And I love the fact that you all have talked already so much about life in Wyoming, because my earliest memory of Joe is of him wearing a cowboy hat. And that's what I think of him as a kid. And I don't have many other memories of him. But I also want to correct John's comments about Joe and his tuba, and that is, from my point of view, 2 years younger, that tuba was bigger than Joe. I couldn't believe he could even carry it. And when he was a kid, he was Joey. He wasn't Joe, he was Joey. And at some point, I don't recall when, he wasn't Joey anymore. There were grown-up tales of feeding the elk when he was living in Wyoming, when he got snowed in and stayed over for the winters. Later in life, as we've already heard, and most of you know, he and Bonner built their own log home and started a family life here in the Berkshires. There were stories about his guitar, fiddle, computer programs, and then artist brushes, canvases, oils, pastels. How multi-talented he was, as Peter said. How many other people you know can milk a goat, create a crossword puzzle, call a contradance, plumb a whole house, paint a representative pastel or watercolor painting, and construct and run a maple sugar operation with Bonner's help. Absolutely etched in my brain. Sorry. This is now what I think about of Joe, not when he was wearing his cowboy hat. Absolutely etched in my brain is the image of Joe as the sole paddler I watched more than once in a green wooden canoe, silently skimming across an Adirondack lake. How he loved, so many things in nature. bird songs, trees, perspectives, water, shadows, colors. And he was whip smart. His college roommates described to me watching him more than once, sleeping on their dorm room sofa at night with a textbook open on his chest. And then the next morning he'd come back having aced the test. Joe and I unfortunately didn't get together often. We lived too far apart, and we let our busy and very different lives get in the way. But when I think of him and his life and his lifestyle, I can't help but think of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. Individualists, self-reliant citizens, directly connected to nature. Much more able to find peace and simple joy than most of us. From an early age, Joe's choice was to take a road less taken. And although he had big feet to support his tall frame, as Peter said, he left almost no footprint on the environment and his friends in nature. He was quiet, thoughtful, forever kind, and considerate of virtually everything around him, even his bratty little sister. Unlike Emerson and Thoreau, though, Joe didn't preach his gentle philosophy. He merely modeled it for those around him. In my opinion, we desperately need more of him, especially today. Joe loved the Berkshires, and this community in particular, and he worked hard, literally, as Peter said, for 16 years, to make sure that this community center would come to life and become an asset for all. And I am so thrilled to see that it has. If you look at the center's daily calendar, you'll see at least 2 things scheduled for every single day. Everything from ping pong and yoga to Tai Chi, from Al-Anon and bridge. And inside today, you'll see some of Joe's amazing paintings and the instruments that he created. Joe has clearly left a huge gift, an indelible positive mark on this community. And I hope that you will take good care of it and enjoy it ever and ever in his honor. I feel sure that all of you know Joe's family was his everything. Bonner, Sudi and Cora, son-in-law Pete, and his wonderful grandchildren you see running around, Lua and Miles. And I can't forget to mention his 4-footed pal Rocky. Joe's incredibly strong work ethic kept him going for them, even during his last months and days, to provide for them, to keep them safe and warm, to support them, to help them prepare for his absence, and to make them smile. And wow, what a smile. Just look at the picture that Bonner put in your program. There is a smile that we might never see again. But I hope that, like me, you'll all keep in your heart this photo or the memory of Joe's smile to keep his memory alive. Thanks for being you, Joe. Forever, my big brother.
Hey, Chloe. Joe's other sister, whose name is Kit, couldn't be here because, can you hear me? Kit has to take care of a horse farm down in Virginia where her daughter normally would be doing that, but had to be away, and so Kit sent a poem. This is a poem she wrote for Joe soon after his diagnosis. And, wow. Yep, that's it. That's the poem. I just. Shorten it a little. All right. Okay, later I'll read you the part I crossed out. Maybe. How do we love you, Brother Joe? Let me count the ways. Plays the fiddle, guitar, of course the banjo. Makes people happy so many days. Feed some elk, camp in the snow, fly that airplane, way to go. Wyoming times, almost for good. Round up the ponies on the mountainside. Cool in the mornings, need the hood. Fix whatever, done with pride. Build a big log house as you should. Man of so many talents, artist to engineer. Computers he can understand, help the rest. Scientist, botanist, don't shoot the deer. Maple trees tapped, syrup the best. Landscape showing, hope artist, be here. Okay, this is the one I crossed out. I had a problem with the rhyme scheme. I couldn't fix it. Walk in the woods, know all the names of tree, bush, and certainly birds. You see what's coming. Recognize their voices, all he claims. Scat on the ground, sees the turds. Even for golf, good at the games. Learn to read from Cowboy Joe. Memorized the words, found the hat, wore it to bed, he loved it so. Such a kind fellow, never a spat. Philosopher inside, ready to go. Sudie Baker is here. There she is.
I hate public speaking. I'm Sudie. I'm Joe Baker's daughter. My sister Cora and I were so lucky. We had the best dad. When I was little, I loved astronomy. Dad loved to study the stars and space with me. I remember going outside to the driveway with our whole family to look at the moon through the telescope we had. The four of us did so many things together. We took camping trips out west to Yellowstone and the Tetons. I remember setting up the tent together with buffalo grazing nearby and enjoying the view of the grassy meadow near Norris Campground. Our farm animals loved Dad. He greeted each one in his quiet way, speaking softly and reassuringly. Dad was an amazing artist. He built beautiful instruments and then became an accomplished painter. He specialized in painting landscapes, and over the years, I loved to see how his painting evolved from looser, more abstract interpretations of the outdoors. Throughout his life, he was always interested in learning something new. I recently found a collection of books he gave me on string theory. He was so sure I would find it just as fascinating as he did. And if anyone is wondering what string theory is, it is a theoretical framework in physics. And I'm afraid I didn't find it as interesting as he did. My parents built so much together, from clearing the land, hauling the logs, to building their own house. They loved all things living. My mom used to bring down plants and flowers that she found outside and leave them on the kitchen table. Dad would come down from his study and he would look them up and leave a note about what they were. My kids were lucky to get a few years with Dad, who they called Babu. I remember going for a walk while Dad carried my daughter Lua in a backpack. Our progress was very slow because he would stop at every high bush blueberry so that Lua could pick some. When my son Miles was born, as soon as he could walk, he liked to walk right next to my dad, holding his hand, which meant Dad would walk leaning over because he was so tall. He never seemed to mind. Dad, I miss you so much. I especially miss your hugs. I hope your spirit is somewhere among the aspen trees and the elk that you love so much. I love you.
Thank you, Sudie. Tim Byrne, Joe's cousin, came down from Maine today.
Thank you, Paul. I'm now Bonner asked for some of my memories of Joe, and they go back to almost before everyone but two people here, because our mothers were pregnant at the same time, and we're about 3 months apart in age. Let's start the story with our grandparents, John and you can remember that they're very careful about developing relationships with each of their grandchildren. They had seven of us, and they spent time for each. And I'm glad to hear today to know that the next generation is cared for by their grandfather. It's a sweet thing. Families with dedication and love, Sudie and Cora and Bonner. Your dreams come to life. Joe loved you, embraced you, and hopefully made you happy members of his family. I really want to talk about his artistry because that's where we most recently connected. I loved music, he loved music, he liked to make it, and he liked to make the things that made music. And that's pretty neat. It's all, I can't figure out how to make a melody, let alone sing it. Software, this I get, it's the transformation of pixels to solve problems. Little bits of things turn into big things, one bit at a time. And that translates also to his visual artistry through painting. It's a genetic gift, I think, from the Bensons in our family background, and it certainly manifested in the beauty. Joe and I just developed the idea of working together, painter and photographer, in a plein air setting where we spent 3 or 4 days creating work from our surroundings. He introduced me to the valley around Route 7, from North Adams to Lenox, over to Olana on the Hudson River. I met other artists, painters, a sculptor, Wendy, wherever you are, who's an amazing basket weaver, and I love your artwork. That was a wonderful experience for me. Joe wanted to see what he called the bounding coast of Maine, and I made a poster for him. I don't know if you still have that, but I can probably produce it. That had inspired both John and Frank Benson 80 years ago, and so he came north. We saw lighthouses, old trains, windswept cliffs, and overlooking huge rolling waves. Creating any art is challenging. Those of you who do that know it. It's fun to work with another person, though. Working in the same area, same time, same light, weather, even mosquitoes. How do two sets of eyes interpret this setting? Seeing how they translate the same view in front of them into tangible work is absolutely amazing. I know I learned a lot from him in watching Joe bring a scene to life on this sketch pad or his canvas. We looked at the sky a lot, as John said. But what tops most landscape pictures is the sky. It creates a mood. It's the source of the light in the picture. In talking about it one afternoon, we discussed the skies in John Benson's seascapes. Great big clipper ships and dramatic skies and rolling water. They're wonderful pictures. Cumulus clouds, look outside the tent today, were edged in silver and shades of gray and tinged with yellow, greens, pink, and purple in all these paintings. We called these poppity skies after our great-grandfather. Late last summer, and I think my wife can attest to this, I was driving north on I-95 in the late afternoon, and the skies were radiant in the setting sun. Blue, gold, gray, yellow, purple. I called Joe right then on the phone and described the skies. And I said, hey Joe, there are poppity skies all over the place in front of me. And he responded immediately saying, thanks, I needed that. And I know exactly what you are seeing, Tim. It was kind of neat and special to share those images and feelings. And that to me is Joe. Silver, gold, purple, and peaceful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for those poppity skies. Tom Herman's up next. Tom's an old friend, lives in Nova Scotia. We went to college together. That's the short story.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good. Just tilt this up a bit. Yeah, hi. I'm Tom Herman. I have known Bonner since time immemorial. BBE, before the Baker era. And we shared many adventures together. And Bonner was kind enough to introduce me to Joe and share a little bit of him with me. My visits were irregular and infrequent because of geographic distance, so I regret not knowing Joe better than I did, although I got lots of stories and lots of reports. I have to say I am forever grateful to Joe for making Bonner whole. It's kind of like you know, for completing Bonner, if I may, it's kind of like the ancestral dance, you know, in a primordial sea between a prokaryote and a wandering proto-mitochondrion. Right? Once the two got together, anything was possible. Right? It was just remarkable. Energy was boundless, and the sky was the limit. It was the truest of mutualisms. Joe, and I'll try to be uncharacteristically brief here. Joe would be saying, Tom, just cut to the chase here. This is not a TED Talk. But seriously, Joe was truly a Renaissance man. And we've heard that already today. So I'm just repeating I'll repeat more briefly what has already been said about his many skills. But from a Princeton grad to a wrangler, to a birder extraordinaire, to a homesteader, to a musician, to a luthier, to an IT consultant, to a pastel painter. I mean, seriously, passionate and accomplished in whatever he set his hand and mind to. And that was what was so remarkable. And always throughout, a loving husband, father, and grandfather. His was really a quiet and steady presence. And unlike so many who exude confidence, of which there are no shortages, Joe exuded competence. I was searching for a simile or a metaphor to describe Joe and his legacy, and wrapping my mind around this. So immediately, my mind went to mycelia. All right, I'm a biologist. What can I say? But seriously, it went to mycelia. You know, mycelia quietly connect and sustain the trees in a forest, right? And they do so at the same time as they maintain a really low profile. Nobody knows they're there most of the time because they're underground, right? Every once in a while they announce their presence by popping out a fruiting body here and there, but otherwise you don't know they're there. Anyway, I thought that was a great metaphor, but then I thought, some people might be offended if I compared Joe to a fungus. So then I thought, all right, I can evoke network theory because actually, you know, Joe was an IT guy. He's really good at this stuff. And, well, you know, I could, you know, a network theory full of nodes and edges and neighborhoods and all that good stuff, you know, that comes with network theory to describe his impact. Then I thought, yeah, that's a little nerdy and a little too academic. So I thought, okay, I settled on a simple concept. Everybody, a circle. Because who doesn't love a circle? Except maybe an ellipse. But circles have this inherent symmetry, you know. They're inclusive. They surround us. They embrace us. They bound our worlds. They even move us from place to place. And who doesn't love pie? Well, circles feature prominently in nearly all indigenous cultures, and they overlap in interesting ways. They're infinitely scalable. You can expand them, you can diminish them, you can open them, you can close them. So going from cells to circles, and back to Bonner, remember Bonner? Once Bonner's circle had absorbed Joe, like cells, circles can be permeable. It just continued to expand. Enriched by the arrival of Sudi and Cora and the newest generation, all of us here today inhabit many circles. Some overlap a little, some a lot, some are expanding, some not. But the circles that we represent here today all share one common element: Joe. And I know you would all agree that all our circles were richer for his presence. As we stumble into this new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, marked by our relentless and enduring footprint, we're reminded that as daunting as the global challenges are, climate change, biodiversity loss, sustainable economies, their solutions lie largely locally, in resilient and caring communities, ones that Joe spent a lifetime nurturing. So Joe understood this. He got it better than most. Joe understood that we make the planet a better place, one community at a time, and he lived his life accordingly. He was not interested in likes. He was not interested in affirmation. He simply went about his life doing what was right for his family, his community, and all the other circles that he intersected. And for that, we are all immensely grateful. Thanks very much.
Okay, now that I feel complete, I'm going to welcome Ellen Pearson up here. If I can find her. She should need no introduction, but she is Ellen Pearson.
Let's see, I'm shorter than the last speaker. That should work. Yeah, I think everybody said everything I would have said. I can add a tiny bit here and there, like his horsemanship, his way with four-legged animals really worked for me. He'd come and, the best part is he showed, at my request, he showed up one day to help me get a log out of the woods. This is way before my draft horse days. I had a one-eyed horse named Buddy, and Joe came over, threw a saddle on him, and had some rope that wasn't all that thick, and wrapped it around Buddy's chest and through the stirrups, and we had a bridle on him, and we probably had a logging chain. It's been so long. And Buddy pulled that log out of the woods. And I was like, what? Anyway, just the way he exercised his skills. And before you got to it, John, I knew you were going to say tuba, because he played the tuba in more than one Monterey Day parade, marching down the street with that thing, and it wasn't bigger than he was this time. So I'm trying to wrap it all together. It's impossible, but I don't really need to. Let's see what else. For horses, I finally did get into draft horses and would hook a pair or three up to a wagon or a carriage or a cart and go in the parades. And I made sure to have what we call sidewalkers, one on each side, in case one horse went nuts in the middle of, especially when the band started up or the fireworks, or a toddler in a stroller, all of which did happen. One of my horses reared up. Susan Salou knows her. Her name was Sophie, and almost dumped Wallace Tryon out the back of the cart. And I had two sidewalkers Sophie pulled into the air, and they pulled her back down. So Joe and my son Kervin were sidewalkers, same height, same kind of soft, calm, steady presence, and saved us from many other possible disasters in parades. And it's hard to say how important and how safe that felt. I'm up there in the seat with the lines. We've got pictures of them. It was just so cool, and all that accumulated understanding of big horses, and bucking horses or not bucking horses. So there's that. And then birds, all the way down in North Carolina where I've been living for a while. I'd see a bird at the door fighting himself in his reflection, and I'd email Joe. I mean, I've got plenty of friends who know birds, but it's just more fun to talk to Joe. So he'd write me back, that's a this, and and it probably is flirting with itself or fighting with itself. And so now every time I see a parula warbler, there's Joe, or a ruby-crowned kinglet. And I'm so happy and grateful for that. The thing I thought I might give you that is not easy to give because he's gone is Joe's words. I knew he was sick. I forget exactly when it was, but I had bought a book on heritage apples in North Carolina, for all the varieties of the origin. And some guy went around and collected all the apples and watercolored pictures of them and wrote each one up with his own experience with them and started raising them and wrote a book and personally autographed it to me. And I bought it and thought, I'll read this and then I'll send it to Joe. I mean, that'll just make total sense. And then years later, I'm like, oh, I never sent it. And he's sick, very sick. And should I send it now? I mean, isn't that asking him to respond in a way that he might not be prepared to do at this point? Or would it be, and then finally I just said, oh heck, I'm just going to send it. You know, he can always ignore. And I got a real thank you note written down on a set of note paper from Joe that would put my high school self to shame. In Waxahachie, Texas, you get graduation presents. You have to write each person a thank you note, or wedding presents, or whatever. Each person a thank you note. That person calls your grandmother and reads it to her. Your grandmother, in turn, says, okay, that was Ellen, good. Well, what about so-and-so? This note Joe wrote me would have been right up there at the top. And I'll read you some of it. I mean, Joe and I never corresponded. We didn't need to, really. Bonner and I talked a lot in all different ways, but we all know what Joe's like. He's not a big talker or anything. So I sent him the book and sat around thinking, okay, did that, however that works. And I get this note, Happy New Year, January 2025. So not long before he died. Happy New Year and other felicitations of the season. Joe, thank you for the great book, ! The world needs more books like this one, ! I love the way the author has such reverence for the old varieties and has done such personal research on each one. Wonderful. I hope you're doing well and all your generations of offspring. Sorry it didn't work out to see you last summer when you were up here. We all got COVID. My family got COVID. I never got to see Joe. Joe says, he goes on to say, I've recently entered the next chapter in my cancer story, as the chemo drugs of choice have stopped being effective. So I've moved to a reduced version, which means we don't expect it to do as much, but one result will be an easier time for me without so many chemo side effects to deal with. So far, that is true. That was just so calmly stated. Like as John said, he just managed his situation so sweetly and calmly and reassuringly. He went on to say, P.S. The watercolors of the apples in the book got me to pull out the painting of a wild apple you did for me about 400 years ago. A brilliant painting. This coming from a real artist. He gave me that. He gave me thanks. He did it sincerely. I think he really enjoyed the book. And he signed it, picturing you sitting around in the middle of a pile of dogs. Love, Joe. And he sent it to me on one of his the note cards with his painting on the front called April Promise. So that's what I got for you today. Thank you for Joe.
Lori Shaw, where are you?
I'm right here.
This is Lori Shaw. Also needs no introduction.
I need a lower microphone. There we go. Okay. We are here today because of Joe Baker. And I mean that quite literally. We are here in this spot because of Joe. If not for him, this would be a ramshackle house on an overgrown lot. When this property was donated to the town about 30 years ago, no one really knew what to do with it. Joe, however, could envision what needed to be done, and that was to create the Monterey Community Center. He gathered a few folks together, started a nonprofit organization, and rented the property from the town for $1. Over the next 16 years, Joe worked on this project with the help of many people in this town. It was an uphill battle. There were years of fundraising, tag sales, contra dances, Oktoberfests, raffles, grants were written. Costs escalated as it became clear that the whole house would have to be torn down to its framework and rebuilt. If Joe ever became discouraged, he never showed it. From time to time, when the prospects of creating the community center looked bleak, he would ask our committee if we should keep going or pack it in. None of us had the heart to disappoint Joe, no matter how impossible things seemed. All of us were inspired by Joe's steadfast and maybe stubborn belief that he could get this done. Joe, of course, took on the bulk of the project himself. He did a great deal of the actual labor, sometimes outside in the dead of winter, recruited other local artisans to help, and at one point, when the bank account was almost empty, Joe loaned the nonprofit money to keep the work going. Finally, in 2017, we were able to open the doors of the Monterey Community Center. Joe stayed at the helm for 2 years until the property was transferred back to the town. Then he backed away. His goal was to get the MCC built and up and running, and having done that, he was happy to watch it thrive without him. To my knowledge, he rarely stepped into the building after that. The Community Center Committee strongly felt a need to find a way to honor Joe. We tried to convince him that it would be a great idea if we renamed it the Joe Baker Community Center. Not surprisingly, he would have none of it. The building was for the town, and it would remain that way. Undaunted, our committee tried another approach. We scraped together some money and asked Joe if we could purchase one of his beautiful paintings to hang in the building. He was agreeable to this, but he insisted that he be the one to hang the painting. Of course, he did this in the most unobtrusive corner of the building, where it was barely noticeable. But the joke's on you, Joe, because the painting was recently moved to hang over the fireplace, where everyone will be able to see it and appreciate your genius. There was seemingly nothing that Joe Baker couldn't do or create, and he did it all in his modest and unassuming way. This town has been so blessed that he chose to use his skills to create a place where people gather every single day of the week. Thank you, Joe. We are so grateful.
Well, you're all hanging in there very well. We got one more speaker, Steve Moore, who was one of the people who worked so hard on the community center, and he's going to wrap up the speechifying. Bring it home. Yeah. Steve Moore.
So relative to all these other speeches, I haven't known Joe that long, maybe about 20 years. So this is going to be more like a reporter than some really touching personal comment. And I titled it Joe's House. Just a little background. A lot of us spent a lot of time on here. That's what I'm going to talk to you about. Edith Wilson's gift of this old house was surely a pig in a poke. Perhaps it looked possible from outside, but oh boy, from inside with the plaster walls stripped, it was very troubling. It appeared that the house was two structures stuck together, a not uncommon practice of years ago. There were many examples of farmer framing. Nothing standardized like today's building practices, weak floors, overaged roof, and the question was what to do. Several times Joe and I talked about what to do. Lots of folks would have considered the building gone by, not worth the effort. However, a major constraint to tearing it all down was that it would have to be a municipal project, with public building requirements, with bidding and prevailing wages for all the labor and getting the town to agree to fund it. But for Joe, this had been his friend's Edith's house. I neglected to put in here the fact that the friends were renting this for $1 a year permitted the enormous amount of volunteer work, which otherwise would have had all to be paid for. This would not have happened without that move of renting the property. So I suggested to Joe wrapping the whole exterior with what are called SIPs, structural insulated panels with 6-inch foam cores, plywood exterior, drywall interior. Doing that created an exterior structural building that would preserve some of the interior elements. Not much original remains, and what old framing you see is mostly non-structural. The walls you see are the drywall interior of the SIPs. With the money Joe and the friends raised and kept raising, some contract work was done. Eric Pedersen was hired to install the SIPs. Jim Edelman rebuilt the roof. Meanwhile, volunteers did what they could inside and out, cleaning the interior from basement to eaves, hauling out the old furnace. A new used furnace had been donated. Contractors shored up the foundation and the first floor supports. Windows and doors had to be installed, the mudroom and bathroom framed and finished. Large steel beams were snaked in on top of the upstairs ceiling from which the second floor hangs. If you ever get up there, it's pretty impressive. The volunteer work never seemed to end, and Joe never seemed to go home. The core crew of volunteers, led by Joe, included Mike Banner and Roy Carlisle, who's no longer with us, and myself. Mike and Roy were here doing a lot of various framing projects, hanging sheetrock, and literally anything else that came up. Joe did the wall finishing. I worked mostly in my woodworking shop. I live right across the street, making up all the interior and exterior window and door casings and the finished elements around the fireplace and the stairs. And I apologize if I skipped anyone. Some people just came over just for an afternoon. Some people came and just lent a hand for a few minutes. It was really quite an effort. And always, Joe was here. Mark Amsted's crew added the siding and later the oak floor. The town contributed the driveway and some cash at the very end. And Joe was holding this whole process together and driving the fundraising as well. As anyone who's been involved in rescuing an old building knows, it takes a lot more money and time and perseverance than can be imagined. This place would not have happened without Joe's vision and patience and his attention to detail, his ability to involve so many folks, and his quietly sincere character. Joe is a pleasure for all of us. The community of workers and the Friends of the Wilson McLaughlin House really fostered a place in which now a much larger community is able to thrive. This should have been named the Joe Baker Community Center, but of course, as Lori said, she stole my text, he would have none of that. On a promising note, we're working towards building a pavilion. Get rid of this tent. And that's very likely to be named after Joe. As Bonner said, he's not around to object. So on the last personal note, this refers to the painting that Lori talked about. When I finished installing the paneling over the fireplace, I said to Joe that nothing should be hung in front of the panels for at least several years, for fear of leaving a light spot in the paneling. But when I was designing and building the paneling, I had in mind that someday one of Joe's paintings was going to hang there. As of a few days ago, Joe's painting, The Friends Bought, is now where I think it belongs. I'm no longer worried about discoloring the panels. And besides, this is Joe's house.
Thank you, everybody. I think it's now informal, stand up, stretch, talk to your neighbors, go for some snacks, sit in the sun. And thanks again, everybody, for making this such a good day.